Welcome back to Heart with Abagaba, the podcast where we celebrate families, childhood, and the everyday moments that matter most. Today, I'm honored to welcome John Fela, the Ministry Relations Manager at John and Friends Chicago. John has spent decades pouring into children, families, and faith communities as a teacher, director, public speaker, and disability ministry advocate. As the father of a son with autism, John speaks with heart and wisdom about how churches can better embrace and serve families like his. This is a conversation full of insight, encouragement, and practical hope for anyone who wants to help create more inclusive spaces for all. Let's dive in. How are you today, John?
I'm doing wonderful. Thanks for having me.
You are very welcome. And I am conversing with you from Mesa, Arizona. Could you please tell our listeners where we are chatting from and add a short bio?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm speaking to you from Lyons, Illinois, which, if you're not familiar, is just right outside the great city of Chicago. I'm actually a Chicago born and raised resident. I've lived both in the city and the surrounding suburbs. And my background is I'm currently married to my wife, Faith. It's actually a second marriage, so I'm divorced from my son's mom. My son Chris is 17. He is autistic and nonverbal. He currently lives at a residential and therapeutic day school in Wichita, Kansas. That's not a forever placement. That is just because his public high school in the Chicago area was not a fit for him. So he's finishing up high school there because they can better meet his needs, and then he'll come home probably next year. My story is really, it really begins with my relationship with my son. Being a parent of disability, I will tell you that it led me on a journey. And part of that journey certainly was learning how to be not just a good dad for him, but really what it meant to be a good husband, a good father, and just really present with my family. Those were things that unfortunately I kind of had to learn the hard way. Oh, by the way, I was not a Christian when my wife and I met, and really it was my son's disability and a lot of the struggles that we experienced that actually brought me to my faith. And so from there, what I did is that I really started to lean into really understanding all of the things that I didn't have as a parent of disability, didn't have a lot of friends that understood me, didn't have a lot of support or resources. So I really made an intentional effort, and this is over 10 years ago, to really find and build that, right? And some of those things started small, like starting a group for special needs dads in my community that would meet once a month, and we still do now, as a matter of fact. But some of that was on a bigger scale, working with different disability ministries around the country. Disability ministry is a huge movement in the church right now, and so I started working with a lot of these organizations several years ago, doing a variety of things as a writer, speaker. I've done a variety of podcasts and video presentations, that type of thing, sharing my story. But I also currently work for Joni and Friends, which is a global disability ministry organization. Some people know us. If they don't, they might know our founder, Johnny Erickson Tada. Johnny is in her 70s and has been an incredible disability advocate for over 40 years. And the ministry has been around about that long too. So I work out of our Chicago area office, and we do a variety of outreach with people and families of disability, but my focus in my role is to work with churches. And so I help equip churches with disability ministry, help with training, help with support, help with resources for staff volunteers and the people being served. And we actually cover about a five-state area of the Midwest here, but we do have offices all around the country. So wherever you live, there is one of our offices that cover you as well. So it really is who I am inside and out. I love the work I do, and I really believe that truthfully it is my calling, but it is also one that I only discovered because my son's disability led me to a place where I could fully embrace it.
Thank you so very much for adding the bio. And as you were speaking, I love Joni Erickson Tada, by the way. I read her book over 20 years ago when I lived in Ghana, West Africa, and what an inspiration. I'm so grateful that you were part of her movement and really making a difference in the world. Thank you so much. And I wanted to ask you, what has been your greatest challenge as a special needs father?
So my greatest challenge, and I'll really go back kind of to that time, really before I was saved, before I became a Christian. The biggest challenge was understanding what it really meant to be a good husband and father. When my son was diagnosed with his disability, and he was about a year and a half old, 18 months, when we discovered there was something wrong. He didn't get his formal diagnosis until before he was like 3, but we started therapy and things earlier. What I saw is that his mom, my ex-wife, was an excellent mom and still is. And she really handled a lot, managing like the appointments, the doctors, the therapies, insurance, all of that. And she was very good at that. And she also was kind of a very type A strong personality, and that was her thing, and that's what she did. And I just kind of stepped back. But the problem is that in a lot of families like ours, and this is something I hear from dads and moms all over, is that usually when there's disability that shows up, the dad and of course men being fixers, if we can't fix the problem, well, I'm just going to work and I'm going to throw myself more into my work and work very hard and then make enough money so we can afford these things. Well, in my case, I couldn't do that because I was never the main breadwinner in the family. I was a teacher at the time, so was my wife. But she always made more than me. So it wasn't like I could just write a check for anything I wanted.
Mhm,
So the question then came to me was, what did I do? Right? What was my value? Who was I?
mhm,
And so I had to, and again, coming to my Christian faith definitely helped me with this identity because I know my identity is in Jesus and not anything else.
yeah.
But at the same time, what I had to understand was as long as I showed up and was intentional for my son, then I was honoring my obligation to him and to the family. And then what I also learned was beyond the fact that I wasn't just a checkbook or how much money I made, I learned that my gifting was actually with developing relationships and finding resources and working with other organizations and ministries. So even though I did a lot creatively on my own end, everything that I did allowed me to access resources or get tools or advice from people that we needed for our own son, for my own son. So I learned what my true value was in terms of my gifting and calling. My son's mom had her own, but this is mine, and so I'm kind of more of the big picture guy. When there's a question about, even like this placement, for example, where he's at. This is something where I can reach out to people and ask questions, or if it's any other long-term thing. She can absolutely handle the details. But I'm someone who if we need to find someone to talk to, I'm usually that guy. And so again, I got to that place after being very, very intentional with what I didn't have, what I finally figured out that I needed, and then going about building and developing that intentional community.
So, how has your son's disability affected his opportunities for education or independence?
Well, I will tell you that he absolutely is not independent and will never be. And that's just a fact. We had to make decisions, and really it was a lot more challenging when he was very young because we had tried some more traditional environments like typical preschools or even in-home daycare kind of a thing. We tried Montessori, which I actually, as an educator, I have a background in as well, and I really believe in, but that wasn't a fit for him either. So really as part of this challenging season of life that we experienced, again, that time in my life where I came to faith, one of the products of that was the fact that we realized, okay, we don't like, the part of Chicago, the suburban area we lived, wasn't a bad area, but for our son's needs, we didn't feel that the school in the district was going to meet them. So
Mhm.
what did we do? We did what a lot of families do. We picked up and we moved, right? Some
Yeah.
families moved to another state or across the country. Luckily, we had options in the Chicago area, so we just moved about an hour south,
Mhm.
and we moved into a great town with a great school district and a great setup, and it worked beautifully for him for many years until it stopped, until it didn't, and we just had that one bad year, and we had to make another shift. Now, I will say from kindergarten through sophomore year of high school, everything was pretty good. Not perfect,
Mm-hmm.
but pretty good. And again, some of that is just because of who our son is, right? It's just because of his challenges. It's not that the school is necessarily doing something bad or wrong. In the case of what happened to get him to force our hand to move him to another place, I think some of that might have been the school environment. But again, if you consider all of the good years we had, I would say that that was a wonderful decision and it was the right decision. Unfortunately, parents in our situation, there may come a day when, okay, now that right decision is no longer the right decision, and now we have to make a different choice.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I wanted to know, what is it that special needs fathers struggle with the most? You mentioned moving. Do you think these struggles are often hidden or misunderstood?
Yeah, I think the biggest one really is men just not understanding their role or their value, right? And it's also a struggle too, because again, the way that men are wired and we're fixers. So if we can't fix the problem, then we just kind of say, okay, we're just moving on.
Right.
There's also a lot of guilt and shame that gets wound in there too, especially if it's, say, a male child, for example, because dads, to be fair, they have goals and dreams for their kids. They want their kid to play the same sport they did or go hunting or fishing or, whatever your thing is.
Hmm.
And the reality is a lot of our kids can't do those things, or at least they can't do them in the way, that we might be used to doing them. But in terms of that particular challenge, this is where I always tell dads, I remind everybody, your child is still your child, right? There's going to be limitations. There are going to be things they maybe never do. But then you just have to be creative and figure out how you can kind of develop your own special way to do things. So I always tell the story, for example, about my son loving to watch sports on TV, right? So like basketball, he likes watching basketball on TV.
Yeah.
He doesn't have the coordination to play, but where we used to live, we used to have a hoop in our driveway. So, I would shoot the ball, whether I made a basket or not, he'd still clap and cheer because he thought that was cool. I'd pass the ball to him, he would kind of pass it to me, and
Hmm.
we just kind of stand there and mess around. Again, is he going to make the high school team? No. But that's okay because we're still having an experience.
Right.
And that's the thing that I have to remind every parent out there, mom or dad, is that don't don't allow the disability to stand in the way of having a relationship with your child. It might look different. It probably will look different, but that doesn't mean it still can't have value or be meaningful.
Oh, thank you so very much for sharing that. I was just going to ask you if you had any word to share with fathers or mothers who feel isolated. And so you said that beautifully. And how did you get started in your advocacy work?
Yeah, so that goes back to, again, when I discovered that I really didn't have people who understood me. I had family and friends, but none of them knew what I was going through. So, a lot of it was really intentionally developing community. Now, in the beginning, it was again moving to a new town, new school district for my son. We developed relationships with other families around us, and it was really the families that went to the same school as our son, so that was convenient and all in the same neighborhood. But then I started to get, kind of the whisper of the spirit in my ear about it's time to do something more. So again, I started in small ways, like doing a support group for just the dads in my community. But then, I got introduced to blogging for special needs ministries. I actually had a special needs mom that I knew, actually through Joni and Friends, as a matter of fact. And this is before I started working for them, because we were involved with some of their outreach. And she referred me to this ministry, and I started writing for them. And then I started writing for more ministries, and then I started speaking at their conferences, and it just kind of snowballed from there. So a lot of it really was just being open to the possibilities, right? I always knew that I wanted to give back and maybe give back in certain ways. I didn't quite know what that looked like.
Hmm.
But as opportunities presented themselves, I just kept saying yes because, I was just in a place where I said, if God is putting it in front of me, I'm assuming this is what I'm supposed to do. And now that, of course, has led to me now working for Joni and Friends. I've worked for them for the past few years, which has been a great blessing. And then also, too, now my advocacy work is going to take another step up because I actually just agreed with a publisher to have my book released finally after many years of working on it. My book will be coming out hopefully this year, and
Nice.
it will be a memoir of my journey as a special needs dad, and
Wonderful.
also how faith played out in there as well.
That is so amazing. How did your background as a teacher and parent influence your advocacy?
So I will tell you that it's been very valuable because it has allowed me perspective, meaning I understand what it's like to be a parent in these meeting rooms and these IEPs and all of these things. I also know what it's like to be a teacher, to be a teacher on the other side and to try to work very hard with a student. I didn't always do special ed. I actually, at the end of my career, I taught special ed for a couple of years. So I do know that experience. And so again, it's just one of these things where, I always encourage people to show empathy and kindness, right? It is so easy for parents to feel like the school or the school district is against them, and likewise, it's easy for the teachers to think the parents are against them. The
Yeah,
reality is that we all want the child to succeed, right? The easier you can make that relationship, the better it's going to be for all parties. And I know that my son's mom and I always did a great job of making sure that the staff at school, the teachers, the therapists always felt supported and always felt like we were in their corner. Because again, it very easily can deteriorate and disintegrate into, anger or frustration or whatever.
hmm
And the goal is to not let it get there because again, remember why you're there. You're there for the child. And at the end of the day, you can make it work, but you have to let your guard down a little bit and also see it from the from the other person's side as well. So that has absolutely helped me in terms of my work because again, bringing that perspective, especially when I work with families and things, I remind them, look, I've been where you've been, but I've also been where those teachers and staff members have been too. So empathy at the end of the day is really key.
I like that. I like how you said, remember why you're there. Remember the child. That is just golden. I love that. What specific challenges do adults with disabilities face? You may have touched on that a little bit, but any more insight would be great.
Yeah, that's a very, very unique and challenging kind of a dynamic. So, like in my son's case, for example, he will never be independent enough to live by himself, and he will never be independent enough to hold a job. Now, do people with disabilities live on their own to some degree? Absolutely. Do they hold jobs to some degree? Absolutely. But one of the big issues is that there isn't enough truly supportive housing for the growing number, and it is growing, make no mistake about it, the growing number of adults with disabilities, especially young adults, and their living situations. And some of these adults, again, in my son's case, he needs, really round the clock care almost. Some don't need that, but they do need supportive environments. They need environments where there might be some staff available or someone to help assist them with something or answer a question or who knows. And likewise with jobs, there are lots of adults with disabilities who can hold a job. Now, again, it might, be something that might only be at their, let's say, local grocery store or retail or, maybe even, something else in some other small business. And that's fine. But I think what we also need to remember is that the goal, and this is also what I tell churches too, and coming from my teaching background, the goal is, what in the world of education we would call least restrictive environment, meaning as much freedom as you can give someone, relatively speaking, give them that freedom. So we always want to be encouraging not just the families, but also businesses, right? Also employers. Consider people with disabilities, consider their gifts and talents. I actually did job coaching with adults with disabilities for a short time.
Yeah.
And that's the thing we would always see is that there are adults with disabilities out there who are actually very capable of doing a lot of different things and bring a lot of different skills to the table. But because they present with a disability, employers, while legally they are required to engage with them, they may be a little bit more hands off in terms of okay, there are some things that either we feel like they can't do or don't want them to do, as opposed to some of these adults we would work with who not only showed that they were capable, but many times they would communicate themselves. I don't want to do this job anymore. I want to do something different, or I want to do something more challenging, or I want to do something I like. And don't we all want that? That's the same thing that anyone would want. So
Yeah.
we have to remember that we're treating everybody respectfully and equally and with the value they deserve. And we need to be looking at how we can create more of those opportunities and likewise with living situations. We need living situations that are not just, let's throw everybody in a group home and babysit them. It's, hey, you know what? There are folks who, can and show way more independence.
Right.
How are we helping those folks along as well? And even for the ones that don't, like my son, are we also making sure that, we're engaging them and allowing them to live their best life as well, kind of a thing. So these are all big picture questions and challenges. I know a lot of people around the country and locally here in Chicago that are working on that. People with organizations and nonprofits and parents have started things. So we're all trying to answer those questions, and it will take some time, but I'm encouraged that I think a lot of people are seeing the value of people with disabilities and how we can really be including them more in society.
That is wonderful. So, speaking of disability and the challenges, how does your work with churches support families and individuals with disabilities?
Yeah, so this is something that I think it's very overlooked. It gets overlooked by the church and even families with disabilities. So the thing that I emphasize when I have the conversations, either with a family or with the church, is that, if you take my son, for example, right? My son is an
Right,
only child. I'm also an only child. His mom is an only child. Now I'm remarried, of course, and his mom will probably be remarried at some point. But the point is that in most families of disability, the brothers and sisters that are typical, that are independent, when mom and dad are gone, they will usually step in. In his
right,
case, he doesn't have that. He may have, some extended relatives, whatever, but at the end of the day, there will come a point in his life when everybody that's cared for him is gone.
mhm,
Who is going to be his community? Who are going to be the people that step in and say, I love you, happy birthday, Merry Christmas, whatever? That can be the church. In the same way the church would step in with someone who might be terminal with cancer or in hospice, or someone that's elderly that maybe has mobility issues or just can't get out of the house. They might be visiting. My son may be a lot younger than maybe some other folks, but the fact is that he still needs that engagement and that involvement. And so what I encourage churches in my role, in my work, and really what our ministry does is to remind the church, one, that they need to be opening the doors to families of disability, and many churches feel like they are ill prepared or unresourced, or they don't know what to do. The bottom line is that you just want to make sure that you're opening the door, period, right?
right,
Families like mine are very open to giving suggestions or ideas, and at the same time, the church needs to remember, as I like to put it, you have an obligation, but also an opportunity to serve these families. Serving families and individuals with disability is scriptural, right?
right.
We start in our ministry straight from scripture. That is our foundation. That's the total foundation of our ministry, but also it is the foundation of what we do. So we can tell you in a million places how scripture says, yes, this is what you should be doing. At the same time, think about the opportunity you have to serve these families, right? Because many times churches just see it as a burden, and I remind them, no, because these families are coming in. First of all, it's a new family.
Right.
Like any other new family in your church, of course you would want to welcome them, right? And then think about the blessings that'll come with serving that family.
Yes.
And this is the thing that churches have a very hard time wrapping their heads around. I remind them that those individuals with disabilities, again, going back to the conversation about the employment, have gifts, have talents, have things they're good at and like to do. They
Oh
can
yeah.
also be serving in your
Oh
church.
yeah.
And the churches that do
Oh
this
yeah.
well and right, those individuals with disabilities are engaged in a volunteering role as well.
Hmm.
And that's powerful, and that's really what we're going for.
That is so powerful. I just love the idea of inclusion. So, why is community such an important part of support for parents of disability?
Because you cannot do this alone. That is the simplest answer to that.
Right.
When people ask me my advice, and again, as a former teacher, I use my former teacher brain. So I give advice and I say my best advice is number one little A and number one little B. Number one little A for me is my Christian faith. I am nothing without it. It is the foundation of everything I have and I am. I realize though that there are lots of people in the secular world I talk to in terms of working with disability. There are people who might not be Christian religious, and I say, okay, that's fine. But here's the thing. Number one B is community. You must have community,
Yeah.
right? Now, as a believer in Jesus, of course, I kind of automatically have community, but as a parent of disability, you need your own community. You need people that get you. You need
Right.
people that can understand because it is such a unique path and journey we're on. And whether you're a parent or not, if you only have typical kids, you're never really gonna get it exactly in terms of the way that we've experienced it.
Right.
So I say get you some community. If you don't have anybody, and I say this and I say it jokingly, but I'm really serious. Anyone can reach out to me. I'm always happy to talk to someone. And there are tons of resources out there. If you don't have resources in your own community, whether through a school or a therapy clinic or through a church for ways to engage with families of disability and get the support you need, there are lots of national organizations out there that have virtual support groups. There are some great ones for special needs dads, in fact, that I'm involved with. So you can get connected with resources wherever you are, especially now in the virtual world after COVID. You can always connect with someone like that. And if you prefer to meet with someone in person, those things exist too. So I encourage them, reach out, ask questions, see what's available in your area, see what feels good to you, but don't do it alone. Get at least one person that
Hmm.
understands you from this perspective. And
Right.
even if that person is me, and I'm serious about that. But get yourself one person who will understand you, listen to you, and be there because, again, it is such a unique journey, but you cannot do it alone. And even if you have friends and family, but if they don't understand your journey, it's not exactly going to be the same. So find yourself people that get you.
That is so powerful, John. Speaking of resources, what resources should every special needs family know about?
Well, you should absolutely know about Johnny and Friends because besides the fact I work for them,
Yeah.
but Johnny and Friends is a wonderful ministry, and the thing that I encourage families about are a couple things. Obviously, because I do church training, so if you're a family of disability and you're a family of faith, but you don't have a church or your church doesn't have disability ministry or disability support, please reach out to us. Again, I do it in my part of the Midwest, but we have offices all over the country. It's just as simple as going to our website, johnnyandfriends.org, punch in your zip code, and you'll find the office closest to you. And there's someone, like me in your area. But we also do wonderful family retreats. And here's what's unique about that, because there are a lot of organizations and ministries that do retreats for families of disability, or more specifically for the individual with a disability, like especially if they're a younger person. But ours are designed for the whole family. So the whole family, regardless of the size your family gets to go, doesn't matter the age or condition of the person with the disability, we match up with a one-on-one buddy for the week that supports that person with the disability with the family. But we have programs for the entire family. For the person with the disability, if there's a typical brother, sister, whatever that is, moms, dads, for the adults, we have groups. We have a camp pastor. We have a message every morning. We have worship every morning. We have a ton of events. And again, it's designed to pour into the whole family. So the whole family is refreshed and refreshed spiritually as well. So it's a really powerful experience. It's a wonderful thing. I spent many years going with my son for years before I started working for Johnny Friends. So I can tell you it's a really, really good thing. So please check that out. And then a couple other things I'll mention too. Another great organization in the country is called Key Ministry, KEY. Again, it is another Christian organization, but they have incredible resources, especially for churches, but also for families. And pretty much anyone in this disability ministry world that is an author, speaker, expert is connected with Key Ministry on some level. So definitely check them out. They also do a great national conference every year. I always present at that as well. And so it's wonderful to get resources there. And then the last one I'll mention really quick is Special Fathers Network. Special Fathers Network is an organization designed just for special needs dads. Okay,
Mhm.
so it's based in Chicago, but it's a national organization. We have in-person support groups around the country, but we also have virtual ones. So if you're in a place in the country where maybe there isn't an in-person one, you can get plugged into a virtual one that meets weekly. And there's a ton of great podcasts, videos. There's a virtual conference once a year, and there's also a retreat for dads once a year in the fall as well. So get connected with that. It's a wonderful resource. I've worked with them for years, and I've done a number of things with them, and they're incredible. So that's just a few that I'd recommend. There are many others, but what is great about, especially an organization like Key Ministry I mentioned, I consider them to be kind of a hub, meaning you will find so many other people and ministries and resources attached to them, and then
Hmm.
it'll just kind of open up for you. So those are the top three I recommend for anybody. And again, whether you're a person of faith or not, don't let that stop you because again, the resources are great. And again, it's
Right,
just great to be connected with other people who get you.
right. Thank you so very much for sharing that. If you could sit across from a parent just starting their journey with a newly diagnosed child, what would you say to them?
Well, first of all, I would say remember that your child is perfect exactly how they are. Your child is created in the image of God, and your child is made exactly the way they were supposed to be made. It might not be what you expected, and I understand that, but that child is specifically built in the way God intended and specifically built and intended for you as their parent, mom or dad. I have a ministry partner in the Kansas City area. And, one of the things that families like us always hear is, well, God doesn't give you more than you can handle. And parents like us hate hearing that, right? Because we feel
Right.
like it's just this throwaway thing that people say and don't really think about it.
Hmm.
And my friend always says, you know what? That is wrong. That's a lie from the pit of hell because God always gives you more than you can handle so you can learn to depend on him, right?
Right.
And so, if you're a person of faith, then you know that ultimately, this is an opportunity for you to lean into that more and keep leaning into it, but then also going back to that point about community, get people around you that understand, right? Because, it's just like at our family retreats. You can always have a small group or a Bible study or a group of moms or dads that you meet with, but when you can combine families of disability with families of faith, that's powerful,
Yeah.
right? Because now you have families that really see it through those same eyes, through those same lenses, can be praying for you, supporting you, and but most of all, understanding what you're going through in a very real way. So that community is so vital. But also don't miss out on the wonderful opportunity to parent your child. However, they might show up in this world, they are still yours and they are still made in the image of God. And you
Oh,
know
yeah.
what? You deserve a wonderful relationship with that child,
Oh,
and that
yes.
is what I would hope for anybody.
Oh, that is just awesome. That is just wonderful. Well said, John. Do you have any social media handles, website that we can follow your work and follow you, follow everything you do? We may have mentioned some, but just feel free to drop them all. I will put them in the show notes for listeners to follow you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I often joke that you can just put my name into the Google machine and you can find me. But I have a website. It's just my name, johnfella.com, and most of my content is on there. Now, I will tell you that my friend who is my webmaster doesn't always get everything on there because I'm always making new stuff. So if you want to find the most current things, you can just go to my social media. So I'm on Facebook. I have a dedicated Facebook page. It's John Special Needs Blog, John Special Needs Blog on Facebook. I also have a regular Facebook account. You could certainly reach out to me on either one. I'm on Instagram, John underscore fella underscore one on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn, X, Alignable, all of those. Just punch in John Fela. And again, I did mention that I have a book coming out. Hopefully this year, that book is tentatively titled Faith Like My Father. So Faith Like My Father, that'll be coming out hopefully later this year. I will be blasting that out on, of course, my social media and website as well. But once that's available, if you want to check that out, I'd very much appreciate it.
Okay, congratulations for your upcoming book, John. Thank you so much for sharing your heart and wisdom with us today on Heart to Heart with Abagaba. Your voice is such a gift to families and churches alike. For
Thank you so
conversation,
much.
you are very welcome. What a powerful conversation with John Fella. I so appreciated his heart for families, his honesty as a father, and his deep commitment to helping churches become places of belonging for individuals with disabilities. If you'd like to learn more about the work of Joni and Friends or explore some of the resources John mentioned, be sure to check out show notes. And as always, thank you for listening to Heart with Abagaba. If today's episode spoke to you, please take a moment to share it with a friend or a loved one. Leave us a review or follow the show so you won't miss an episode. Until next time, keep holding space for wonder, connection, and grace. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining us for another heart to heart moment. I hope today's story touched your heart the way it touched mine. If this episode spoke to you, share it with someone you love. And don't forget to subscribe to this and our YouTube channel so you never miss a moment of connection, inspiration, and joy. The stories and insights shared on Heart to Heart with Abagaba are personal and based on lived experiences. While some of our guests may be licensed professionals in their fields, the content of this podcast should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. For expert guidance, please consult a qualified professional directly. Until next time, take care of your heart, take care of each other, and keep celebrating the love that makes us family. Celebrate!